2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9 through 12. This man will come to do the work of Satan, with counterfeit powers and signs and miracles. He will use every kind of evil deception to fool those on their way to destruction, because they refuse to love and accept the truth that would save them. So God will cause them to be greatly deceived, and they will believe these lies. They will be condemned for enjoying evil rather than believing the truth. Today, I'm going to continue the deceptive truth concept that I started in my last video. Today's focus is going to be really around food and how we've been deceived into following what some of these bigger companies want us to believe about our health. And it really only benefits them, puts our health at jeopardy, and keeps us in this constant cycle of gaining weight, needing more medication, going in and out of the doctor's office and not understanding why you're always sick, low energy, hormones disrupted, difficulty concentrating. And really, whether your goal is to lose body fat or you just want to be healthy, like 80% of it is going to come from what you're actually eating, right? And you can do all the working out in the world if you want, but if you're eating Wendy's every day, if you're eating all these food dyes, if you don't even know what you're eating, you're going to be sick, right? So 2 Thessalonians, what I really liked was how in verse 11, so God will cause them to be greatly deceived, and they will believe these lies. When you look around at what's gone on over the past few years, even if you approach someone with the actual truth, you show it to them, you can cross-reference it, you're putting it all in front of them, and you're not even emotional. You're just trying to, like, hey, you're misinformed. Let me tell you what the news isn't showing you, right? Because who's paying some of these media outlets? Follow the money. Like, they're getting paid to say certain things. But what's the actual data, right? And when you try to show these things, the world is pushing people towards fear, being afraid of these things, right? Discouraging you to do your own research, discouraging you to get involved, right? Because the less involved you are, the more they can hide from you, right? Causing them to be greatly deceived, and they're gonna believe these lies. It's spot on, right? And one of the main things that I find that people who speak against Jesus Christ, a lot of it is because for them to admit that Jesus Christ is the light, is the Savior, that He's real, it means that their actions actually matter, right? The choices they make in life actually matter. And that's a lot of responsibility for people. And to accept that it matters, it's a lot of sacrifice, which means that a lot of things that maybe you think or you do aren't in line with what the Lord God of Israel wants, and that's too much for people. It really, it's easier to deny Him, deny He exists, because that just takes so much responsibility off your shoulders, and you can just continue living life the way you want, right? Essentially, right? 1860s, butter was expensive. It also didn't last long. It's perishable. People didn't really start having refrigerators till like 1920, 1930. This French guy created margarine, right? And it was advertised as like a replacement for butter, right? Similar tasting, longer shelf life, cheap, right? And it was mainly consisted of vegetable oils, like corn oils and crystallized cottonseed oil. By 1902, 36 million gallons had been sold already. By 1911, the soap maker called Procter & Gamble came out with a new product, and they called it Crisco, which was like that crystallized corn, cottonseed oil, and it looked just like lard. It would melt on the pan just like lard, like pork fat, pretty much. And virtually everyone prior to the 1900s were just consuming butter, lard, beef tallow as cooking oil, 100% animal fat, right? So mostly saturated fats. They started running ad campaigns saying that Crisco was better for your health, and most of it was just, it was cheaper for them, right? All right, so 1912, 2.6 million pounds of Crisco had been sold. At this point, a doctor by the name of James B. Herrick published a paper on what was thought to be the very first heart attack that was accurately described. Heart disease prior to this was super rare. Like, they only had a handful of cases, and they didn't really have a lot of heart attacks, people dying from that. People were dying from other things, like lack of a certain availability of medications and stuff like that, but it wasn't because their arteries were suddenly getting clogged, right? By 1924, it was becoming even more prevalent. That's when the American Heart Association was formed, right? They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't really have a lot of influence at the time. Now, fast forward 20 years later, by 1945, soybean oil was at 1.3 billion gallons that had been sold. It took over all the Crisco sales. By 1948, Procter & Gamble, the same people who made the Crisco, started donating $1.7 million into the American Heart Association. And before that, they had almost no funding, right? So now, as heart disease is becoming a problem, the same people responsible for that sudden increase in heart disease start funding the branch of government that was looking into this stuff, right? I'm just saying, follow the money, right? A little suspicious. By 1955, President Dwight Eisenhower had a heart attack, and people were finally starting to pay attention, like, whoa, heart disease is a thing. What's going on, right? Now, by 1961, the American Heart Association declared to replace saturated fats, pretty much all animal fats, butter, lard, beef tallow, with polyunsaturated fats, which is pretty much like the vegetable oils, the margarine, the Crisco, corn oils, promoting it for heart health, right? They were worried about what happened to the president, and they officially declared, right? And before that, there was absolutely no correlation to heart disease and saturated fat. We went from having 0 grams of polyunsaturated fats, PUFAs, in 1865 to more than 80 grams a day. Right now, a third of our diet comes from these factory oils, and just like the corn oil giants wanted, we started adding these fats to our diet, and now today edible oil is $100 billion company, right? Well, industry, really. So we've got 1909, right? We have margarine that gained popularity, but before that we had butter and lard as like the primary, right? Up until right around here, late 50s, Dwight Eisenhower, president, had his heart attack right here. I'm sure the media started spinning it that it was because of butter, because of beef tallow, because of lard. And then here in the 60s is when the ADA officially said, hey, let's start using vegetable oils because it's better for your heart. And look what happened, right? Everyone just started using that as their main source of oil to cook their food. Now, what's interesting is what happened next, right? Childhood obesity in the same time exploded right around, like right pretty much at the beginning of a decade into this change in vegetable oil consumption. we really started boosting, right? Look at this already, from here to 20 years later, more than double. And now this is slightly outdated, but we're in the middle of like an epidemic, right? Vegetables, lots of, not vegetables, they got a lot of fiber, so it's not the same as just having a whole bunch of refined carbohydrates, but there's not a lot of protein, right? Fruits, same thing, a lot of sugar. I know fructose with the fiber doesn't hit the body the same, but it's still just not a lot of protein, a lot of sugar. And then we have the whole grains, right? Refined. And if you notice the way a pyramid is shaped, right? Like the bottom of the pyramid is the bigger portion of what you're actually consuming in the day, right? Plant oils like water, eggs, like more than halfway up the food pyramid, we're talking about like a serving or two of fish, poultry, right? And then they're talking about dairy. A lot of the dairy we get has a bunch of added sugar in it, a whole bunch of fortified vitamin D, and the hormones they add to it. It's not necessarily the best. I mean, in terms of like cheap, nutrient dense food, it's pretty good, even considering all those things. But a lot of sugar, right? Sugar and fat is really like sugar and fat together is the combination that'll get you that heart attack. But like, look at the top, right? Like, okay, yeah, obviously limit these high glycemic foods, but they're also telling you to limit butter and red meat. Red meat heals, I don't know if you ever lived off of a chicken, but chicken's kind of like paper, right? It tastes like cardboard. Like, you got to put a whole bunch of flavoring on it for it to taste like anything. It just doesn't have much of a flavor. While beef is just top of the line, anything, a steak, ground beef, most cuts of meat are just delicious, right? They're good for you. It's got saturated fat. Now, if you're eating all this other stuff, the vegetable oils that, they're not only are they highly processed, they bleach these things. It's just go look into it, right? Go look into how they make some of this vegetable oil, the corn oil, the palm oil. It's pretty toxic, right? They have to bleach a lot of these, and then they add coloring to it. It's crazy that's supposed to be healthier than the fat that just comes out of an animal. It doesn't get much more natural than that, If you see here, there's an example of like a 1900s, 1920s, like when you go to a diner, like what's on the menu, right? Soup that's going to be mostly, some kind of vegetable, some kind of fat-based soup, hamburger, steak, protein, baked fried fish, protein, a small steak, protein, vegetables, salads, right? Beer. Americans always like to drink beer, but look at the like 80% of this, like maybe 70 is protein. It's mostly protein, right? You got some potatoes and stuff like that. It's not that you can't have those things, but the protein has to be number one, right? And we're getting pushed to limit our red meat intake, limit your protein. Look at how high up on this chart we have the amount of protein we're supposed to eat in a day, right? Versus, like, there's no amount of daily exercise and weight control you're gonna gain from not having a lot of protein. Like, this chart is supposed to be inverted, really, right? Right. Okay. So 1886, there was a Ole Margarine Act, which essentially the dairy farmers were upset because margarine started stealing their sales, and they wanted to have these margarine companies not use food dye, because the food dye was making people think that margarine, which is naturally more of a white color, with the food dye, was looking just like butter. So people were buying it as a substitute, but they already knew at that time that food dyes, there was some risk behind adding that to food. It went so far that by 1900, 26 states prohibited any kind of food dye, and even there were a few, like 2 or 3 of them, that suggested adding like a purple dye into the margarine so people could obviously see that it wasn't butter, right? It was something else, some kind of alteration, right? By 1902, they added like a 10-cent tax into food dyes, but then margarine just started adding a little bit of vegetable oil into the mix, which gave it kind of like a natural food dye, yellowish color, right? By 1906, the FDA banned harmful colors without labeling. So in 1906, they decided that there could be harmful coloring in your food and your products as long as it was labeled on the box, right? And you're expected to know whether or not these things are good for you in the long run or not, right? So there was a shift from the USDA started using a food color grade in the early 1900s. So only a few peas in a can were allowed to be slightly brown. Apples had to be red or they wouldn't be considered fancy apples. So they started putting food dyes in everything, right? Like oranges are actually green, and it's only in cooler temperatures that they start to get like a naturally orange color. But Florida and Texas, where we get most of our oranges from, they dyed them. Yeah, and I'm pretty sure in Brazil too. I'm pretty sure they dye them because they export them and for them to keep that color, right? Similar issue with the salmons. Salmons are actually gray, right? They're fed food pellets with astaxanthin, which makes their flesh kind of pink, and people will pay up to like $1 more for like that pinkish color, other than like other salmon that's got like a slightly dull color. We also catch salmon in Alaska. We send it to Asia. They dye it and then they send it back to Alaska and then they distribute it across America to some of these sushi places. So by the time you're getting that fish, not only has it been artificially dyed to make you think it's like eating its natural diet, because salmon in the wild eat natural foods that add that pigmentation to their flesh, but when they're farmed, they're gray. Like when they die, when they cut them open, they're gray. And they've done studies on this where, like in the 70s, they did studies where if you were in a dark room and they cook you a steak and you start to eat it, it'll taste good to you. You know, you eat it, you chew it, the steak prepared how you like it, it just tastes like beef. But when they turned on the light, they had actually food dyed the steak blue. And the participants would get immediately sick, they'd throw up, they wouldn't be able to continue eating the food. Which means that there's such a powerful attraction to the way food looks, right? So if it's processed or if it's kind of old and it doesn't have these dyes in it, you probably wouldn't buy it, or you buy it once and you wouldn't want to eat it again because your brain just wouldn't let you. Like, we've developed a sensitivity to these colors to protect ourselves, right? You start seeing some meat a little bit brown, a little off color, you're probably not gonna eat it. You know what I mean? So this is like the standard here in America, right? It doesn't have to be 100% proven safe, but they have to be reasonably safe. It can be toxic enough just to not kill you immediately. Even if the studies point to cancer, hormone disruption, you're allowed to ingest it in America, but not in other countries. In America, as long as the revenue's coming in, okay to deceive the public, claim it's healthy. Then they medicate you when you're not feeling well, and then you're left in this never-ending wheel of going to doctors and medications, and you're not understanding why you're just not feeling well, and you're blaming it on this, you're blaming it on that, when you're just eating poison most of the day, right? Most of the time you're eating poison. And like, all right, so what are some of these these examples here, right? Check it out. They've proven here in this with the food dyes, right? And I'll link the study in the description of the video. But kids are having like sensory issues. They're becoming hyperactive when ingesting some of these food dyes, and it's not just exclusive to ADHD kids, like kids that have been clinically diagnosed with ADHD. It's most kids. Most kids will have that hyperactivity, like a neurological response, and they used to think it was the sugar, but it's actually a lot more prevalent with the food dyes with the sugar excluded. So when there's no food dyes and they have that amount of sugar, they don't have the same hyperactivity. They don't have the same sensory issues, right? Again, this is a study that I have here. This is the working conclusions that artificial food colorings are not the main cause of ADHD, but they may contribute significantly to some cases. In some cases, they may additively push a youngster over diagnostic threshold. There are several threads of evidence for biological mechanism, although there's probably not an immune mediated reaction. A direct release of histamine may be involved. So some kind of allergic response to these artificial food colorings. By affecting nutrients and other metabolisms in the periphery, artificial food colorings could affect the brain without crossing the blood-brain barrier, right? Again, the deleterious effects does not appear to be confined to ADHD. The general effect has been replicated. Therefore, artificial food colorings may be more of a general public health problem than an ADHD problem. I thought this was pretty interesting too. Per capita, daily consumption of artificial food colorings has quadrupled in the last 50 years, right? Again, I'm going to link this study in the description, but check it out. This is the nutritional facts from Kellogg's Fruit Loops, and you can look this stuff up yourself. And you go to the supermarket, you can check the box, and you'll see this stuff. It's everywhere. And what's crazy is that to a kid, like, these colors are so inviting. These colors are so like, boom, in your face. Aside from the 28 grams of carbs and the 12 grams of sugar, I mean, who's having 1 cup of freaking cereal? It's always so much more than that. Check it out right here. Red 40, right? Red 40, you can have cognitive issues, hard time focusing, hard time relaxing, you know? Yellow 6, so we don't just got 1 food color in there, we got 2. We got blue 1. BHT, this is some other kind of hormone that's been banned in many countries. All kinds of things. So this is what we're giving this to children. This is what we're giving to kids. Okay, so this is aspirin, right? So this is Bayer's, a common brand, right? I'm not making any of this stuff up. You can go look for yourself. So, okay, 325 milligrams. That's just like your average dose for an adult. But look at these ingredients, right? Now check it out. So we've got the aspirin, which is salicylic acid, I believe. It doesn't say it here, but that's essentially what this is. So the inactive ingredients, right? So out of the 324 milligrams, that's what's in each pill. But they can't just put that in the pill. It needs to be kind of binded with something else so that it can stay in the pill form, or it's just going to be powder, right? And it's going to be hard for you to get an accurate dosage. So they mix it with other stuff. They mix it with this kind of wax, cornstarch, hypermolosis, powdered cellulose, which is pretty much sawdust, and triacetine. You know, maybe not the worst ingredients, especially since you're not eating this all the time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. Now check this out. This is the low dose aspirin, right? I believe it's the 81 milligram. Yep, 81 milligram. So in the same little pill, right? Same little pill. Look at these ingredients, right? So we got the salicylic acid, 81 milligrams in the little pill. And now, in order for it to not have 325 milligrams, they have to put a whole bunch of filler in there to make up the rest of the space, right? The rest of what would have made up the entire size of the other pill, the 325, for it to still be the same size, but they'll sell you only the 81 milligrams of aspirin in there. They're adding all these other ingredients, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, what's this? Yellow 10. Oh, yellow 6. We got all these food coloring in there, right? And what's crazy is in the store, I went to a Walgreens, and I'm gonna put this list back up here so you can look at it real quick. Let's count. There's more than 10 ingredients in this, right? For a pain reliever that's supposed to be a smaller dose, you're packing yourself up with a whole bunch of other ingredients just to make up the difference, right? Anyway, so I went to Walgreens the other day and I wanted to get some aspirin, and immediately I was looking at the aspirin 81, but I was drawn to it because it was like a bright yellow orange, and right underneath it they had that it was on sale, right? It was like 50 cents or something for like a bottle with like 200 or 300, and I was like, that's kind of a deal. Even though it's low dose, I could just take 2 or 3. I just need one bottle, because the other one wasn't that much. It was like $2, but I was like, well, what's the difference? And plus I was drawn to it, and I picked it up and I pulled the little thing behind it so I could see, like, and it had all these ingredients. It had all this stuff, all these food colorings. And then the other one, right, the reggie just had like 5 ingredients. And I was like, wow, if I was a kid, if I was just like going in between shifts and I wanted to grab some aspirin because I'm having a headache, I would probably go for that. I wouldn't even, if I didn't know what I know, I'd go for the cheaper one. And it looks colorful. It looks like it might even taste good to have it, right? All right, we have Gatorade, right? Supposedly to replenish your electrolytes, but it contains yellow 5 and 6. And look, in the European Union, they have to carry warnings on their products that have this stuff. Warnings that it can potentially affect the cognitive performance of your child, right? And there are certain dyes. I think red 40 is actually banned. There's a bunch of foods that are completely banned. You see right here, the wheat thins, the BHT, to preserve freshness. It's banned in the United Kingdom, Japan, parts of Europe. What do we got here? Pretty sure I saw some. Oh, no, that was in the cereal, which is even worse because we're giving this to the kids. It's banned in so many other, first world countries. Why? Because there's evidence to suggest this stuff is horrible for you, right? Yellow 5, red 40, like Skittles. I used to love Skittles. It's known to have adverse effects on children. Right? We're back to 2 Thessalonians. He will use every kind of evil deception to fool those on their way to destruction because they refuse to love and accept the truth that would save them. And I'm sure many people I don't know if many people, but whoever sees this, they're gonna get offended by this, and they're gonna be like, I can't give up my Skittles. Like, okay, go ahead. So God will cause them to be greatly deceived, and they will believe these lies, that this is safe, that they can have it, that there's not going to be any problems behind that. I pray that this gets out there, that people start to see that the deception is everywhere, right? And this is just food, I haven't even covered most of the common topics that are out there that people talk about, right? I haven't even touched on any of those. I'm gonna leave this video here because it's already half an hour. But look into it. God bless. And share the video. Help people realize, like, hey, there's so much you can do to help yourself have a longer life, to help wake you up, to realize that this corporate machine out there is trying to keep us quiet, trying to keep us docile, trying to keep us asleep. And they allow these things in our food to keep us sick. And as a Christian, I don't want to see my brothers and sisters suffer like that. And we suffer most because of the lack of, like, the church suffers from lack of knowledge, right? So I'm out there, I'm sharing this. All right. God bless. Subscribe, leave a comment. Take care.